Thank you. Now going to continue this afternoon's agenda with our second keynote from Sir Mark Walport. I'm sure that he needs no introduction really to this audience, and he asked me to keep his bio as short as possible. So just to say that he has recently been appointed as Chief Executive Designate of the UKRI, but I'm sure you all know that Sir Mark has been a champion for science, engineering and technology in his role as Government Chief Scientific Advisor, Head of the Government Office for Science and Co-Chair of the Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology. Sir Mark.
Thank you much indeed. Indeed, no longer designate or even resignate, but now I was asked to talk about UK research and innovation and its shared priorities with the Lloyd's Register Foundation. And that is actually extremely easy when I look at life matters, protecting life and property, education, engineering-related research, and public engagement. So what does the government care about? Our health, well-being, resilience and security. This stuff matters, and for that reason it matters to UK research and innovation. And it matters in a time of extraordinary global change, where with 7.5 billion people on the planet, extraordinary changes in demographics. So we've got aging populations in Europe, but extraordinary young populations in sub-Saharan Africa, in India, in many parts of South America. And of course, with 7.5 billion people on the planet, that means that there is migration. It means that we will be able to see the imprint of humans on this planet in billions of years' time, whatever species comes to visit us. We've left an indelible mark called the Anthropocene. And there are a whole string of challenges which are around life and property, around education, around how engineering can help us find solutions to some of the interesting problems and opportunities that arise. And so we live in a world where actually interdisciplinary working, research and innovation is going to be required, which is one of the motivating forces behind the formation of UK research and innovation. But secondly, the world of science, research, innovation itself is changing very dramatically, powered by the extraordinary change in technology that means that we can now collect and analyze data sets at most massive, enormous scales. And so big data is something that pervades almost every area of research, but it also pervades areas of analysis, innovation. And in almost every field, we're seeing interdisciplinarity. So the tools of medicine during my working career were hugely influenced by discoveries in physics, in chemistry, and in the engineering that led to the extraordinary imaging technologies that are now we take for granted pretty much. And of course, faced with global challenges around issues around climate, around pollution, around some of the social science challenges, we are only going to work most effectively if we work internationally and in interdisciplinary teams. Thirdly, of course, the world of business is changing, and this artificial limb, which bears no resemblance to the artificial limbs when I was a young rheumatologist, is a very good exemplar of where manufacturing and services are going. It's the fusion of biological, something that will be compatible with an amputated limb, the engineered world, and the world of cyber and information technology as well. And much of the manufactured world is now going to be part of the Internet of Things. And we talk about servitization, buying not a jet engine, but power by the hour, or buying a room temperature of 18 degrees centigrade in the IET, rather than a certain amount of gas or whatever. We're seeing blurring of manufacturing and services, and increasingly we have to be careful of our resources. And of course, that underpins the government's industrial strategy, which has 4 cross-cutting challenges of clean growth, of the future of transport, of healthier aging, and the fourth of a slightly different sort, which is around technologies, around AI and data science more broadly. And then, with the talk of public engagement as part of the mission of the Lloyd Register Foundation, we are living in very different societies around the world. We're living in a world where trust in establishment and in experts is something that can't be taken for granted, where I think we do have to explain what we do better, where we have to truly engage with publics, and it's a two-way exchange, because all new technology can either be used beneficially or potentially in ways that people will not like. And so it's not a question as to whether AI is a good thing or a bad thing. It's a slightly ridiculous question. The question is, in what context is one applying it, and how is one delivering precisely the benefits and avoiding risks around, for example, privacy or unfair decision-making. And of course, social media is rising, so anyone in this room can shout at anyone else in this world. In the world, they can, as it were, tweet a picture of that if they choose. I'm sure it's been tweeted many times when I've used it before. And so talk to the world in a way that wasn't possible before. It means that people can self-organize in ways that they couldn't. And I think the increasing challenge that we have to recognize that there's technology on the one hand and people's values on the other. Their personal values, their social values, if they're politicians, their political values. And we have to actually recognize when we're talking about science or engineering or technology on the one hand and what it can do, and when we're relating it to humans' values on the other, where everyone is entitled to opinions. But ultimately, it's democracies that resolve how we use these things. At least we're fortunate and we live in democracy. So public engagement really does matter. UK Research Innovation itself, it brings together the 7 research councils, Innovate UK, and a part of the dual support system for British Universities Research England, which is working closely with its counterparts in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And the 7 research councils and Innovate UK are reserved. They're reserved for the whole of the United Kingdom. What are we about? Well, ultimately, because everyone in this room who is paying taxes in the UK is actually funding us, thank you very much, we are actually about delivering benefits to all of us, and those can be divided into the cultural benefits of knowledge, the sheer wonder of discoveries about the innermost workings of the body on the one hand and the outermost workings of the universe on the other. It's about basically an enriched, healthier, more resilient, more sustainable society. But then we also want to make knowledge useful through industrial application as well. So it's about delivering economic impact and the social prosperity that goes with that. But we can only do, those two things if we are able to push the frontiers of human knowledge and understanding, because it is new knowledge that ultimately underpins new applications. And so we're all about delivering that, but we can only do it if we provide the best environment in the UK for research and innovation. And I should acknowledge in the Lloyd's Register Foundation meeting the importance of our charity and foundation sector, because we are part of an amazing economy in terms of providing support for research and innovation. And the UK is very unusual in having such a strong charity and foundation sector. But we are, I think, collectively about providing a very strong environment for research and innovation. And that's about being global in our outlook, because the best researchers will work with the best researchers wherever they are, and similarly the best innovators. It's ultimately about people, because it's people that discover things, it's people that work out how to apply them. It's demonstrating that we are trustworthy. And some of that is about being very open in the way that we communicate the results of our work and how we work. And finally, of course, it's about having decent infrastructure. You're not going to find the Higgs boson without a Large Hadron Collider. And equally, if you want a Large Hadron Collider, that really is a global collaboration. And of course, ultimately, we as UK Research and Innovation can only deliver all that if we're a good organisation ourselves. So, turning to bringing safety to life, which is what this meeting is about, I thought I'd make a few remarks, and I know you're having other sessions to talk about these specifically, about firstly emerging technologies themselves, secondly something about robotics, thirdly something about big data, and then something about supply chains. So, on emerging technologies, obviously one of the things that UK Research Innovation does, it supports work on emerging technologies directly. And I think a very good example of that is actually quantum technologies, where the work of the EPSRC, the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, working with an academic community that realized working collectively was going to achieve more than working individually at rather small scale, through the development of 4 quantum hubs distributed around the country, has had a very successful program over the last 3 or 4 years, building on an extraordinarily strong history of quantum research in the UK and contributions from organizations like the National Physical Laboratory and their work on clocks. And of course, the ability to measure time, seconds in infinitesimal divisions, is responsible for so many advances in society that we've sort of almost forgotten and take it for granted. That satellite navigation, of course, depends on extremely accurate timing and triangulation between satellites. And our whole ability to move around cities increasingly is dependent, and countries and anywhere else, is dependent on the use of that technology. So if anyone asks you, why does it matter to measure time to tiny fractions of a second? There are so many reasons that weren't, I think, originally appreciated when people measured time with more and more accuracy. And of course, you could say that it all goes back to the original longitude challenge, which was about determining longitude when you had to be able to determine time accurately when you were far from any standard clocks. So an important role is supporting emerging technologies. But the challenge then, I think, is to take advantage of them. And one of the good news stories about the formation, indeed there are many good news stories about the formation of UK Research and Innovation, is that we are doing it in the context of significantly increased funding. So the funding for all of the organisations within UKRI is going up from about just under £6.5 billion a year to just under £8.5 billion a year over the next 3 to 4 years. And we're able to do things that we weren't able to do before. And the industrial strategy challenge is one of those things. And the 2 key words here are industrial and challenge. This is about taking challenges from industry, and basically these are some of the areas. And they're in areas that are of interest to the Lloyd's Regis Foundation. So for example, Robotics for a Safer World speaks very directly to one of your interests and is an area where we are increasingly working with you. Batteries are absolutely critical. There's no area of energy that batteries aren't going to be increasingly important in, particularly with variable sources of power. And the Faraday Battery Challenge is a challenge that was grown up really out of convergent interest, firstly from some of our very strong electrochemists who came and said to UKRI in its formative stages, we're very good at electrochemistry, please build us an institute. And we said, that's very interesting, why? And then industry at the same time, the automotive industry, having a series of challenges around getting better batteries, able to charge longer, more stable, all sorts of material challenges around batteries. And that, by putting together the push from academia with the pull for industry, led to the generation of the Faraday Battery Challenge. And you can see a whole series of emerging industrial strategy challenges, and we're just underway with a competition for Wave 3 of the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. And I can tell you we've had more than 250 applications, which suggests that, which are in total asking for many billions of pounds. So there's clearly an appetite for this. But I think it's also worth thinking about how we get the environment right in order to maximize the impact of the research and innovation we do. And this is some work that the Government Office for Science did a few years ago and published something called Technology Innovation Futures, where what can government do? Well, in terms of early intervention, it can actually analyze the value chains around different technologies to work out where there are the best opportunities for the UK. And that helps you to make some choices about what you might support and what you might not. It's about being a facilitator for innovation, and so creating testbed environments where people can safely try out innovations in technology. And of course, that is the world in which essentially the evolution of new medicines evolved, where you go through a phase 1 trial. Is it safe in healthy people? A phase 2 trial, does it start to show some beneficial activity? And then you gradually move from a very limited safe experimental environment into nearer and nearer to the real world. And so the Financial Conduct Authority have created a test bed for new financial technologies. It's about something that's very important for government to do, which is to help with skills development. And one of the challenges that has come out of the industrial strategy, cover pictured there, is the need for more people who are educated in data science and artificial intelligence, where the demand for such people is very nearly infinite. And the salaries that go with these jobs are pretty good as well. So that's about PhD studentships, and we're advertising for postdoctoral centres for doctoral training, for centres for doctoral training for data science and AI at the moment. Then government can help to frame markets by being an effective regulator, which isn't regulating for the sake of it. It's working out when regulation is needed and how it might be done in a way that optimizes benefits, minimizes harms, and maximizes the, as it were, the safe implementation of new technologies. It's about setting standards. I don't think people here will need persuading of the importance of standard settings. It's about fiscal incentivizers to encourage firms to do research and development, tax credits, for example. It's about being an intelligent customer, and that's not only for government. I think that's the challenge for industry at the moment as we go through this extraordinary industrial revolution. How can one be a good customer for technology and really make sure that technology, when you purchase it, is what you need and you're not being sold snake oil? And this is actually not a trivial question in order to answer. And then it's about government as a large service provider, so actually providing platforms in which technology can be scaled up. And I'll talk about some of that when I talk about supply chains. So robotics, that's an obvious area where we have joint interests in working with the Lloyd's Register Foundation. And this is an area, again, where it's obvious the importance of the safe implementation of robots in terms of drones, for example, where we know that these are now cheap and if mishandled, even in innocence, can cause terrible consequences. And we have the £93 million Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund challenge in robotics and artificial intelligence, looking in extreme environments, which again is an area where marine and oil and gas is one of the extreme environments where one wants to be able to monitor safety, repair things easily, and that's an environment where it's very difficult for humans to go, but robotics and autonomous systems increasingly can get to the places that humans can't. So that's one important area. Shared priorities, safe and ethical use of data. Wendy Hall and Jerome Pesenti did a lot of work on a sector deal on artificial intelligence. We're very good in the UK at cybersecurity, but this is something that is for all of us because we're increasingly dependent on the security of the cyber systems that connect buildings to the internet, connect almost everything to the internet. And there are two areas where we're working very directly with the Lloyd's Register Foundation and UK Research and Innovation. Firstly, the Compatriots Research Hub, where somehow or other Compatriots turns into cybersecurity of the Internet of Things. I can see the IoT bit. I'm not sure about the CPT, but it's one of the challenges that people like acronyms, and the acronym often drives what the name of the call is. And the PETRAS projects, which is privacy, ethics, trust, reliability, acceptability, and security of the Internet of Things, where again, we're working directly with you, Richard and colleagues, on the critical issue of cybersecurity and the Internet of Things. And one of the very big challenges as we implement the Internet of Things is to actually implement security by design effectively, and not set the password to 0000 when you get a new device and things like that, but I mean much more serious things than that. And of course, you work with us through the Alan Turing Institute, where the Lloyd Foundation made a very major grant very early in their existence. You've talked about the supply chain. This is the Made Smarter review by Jürgen Meyer and colleagues published last year. Increasingly, we can use technology, particularly distributed ledger technologies, to monitor the supply chain of all sorts of products which are safety critical, be it foods, be it pieces of technology, where increasingly, when we live in a world of global trading, can we assure ourselves of the origins, the provenance, and the authenticity of the objects that travel around the world that we buy, either as private consumers or as corporates or as governments? And equally, if you're selling to someone over the internet, how do you know that the people who purports to be whatever they are actually is? And so the whole issues of authentication, identification across cyberspace are of critical importance. And we can now have technologies that will actually deal with that, and you can have smart contracts with distributed ledgers. They're extraordinarily powerful things. And increasingly, I think we'll see them used in things like health services, where they will help to ensure patient safety as far as it can possibly be done. Skills and education, that is absolutely critical. So your educational work is important to us and vice versa. We can only support the most excellent research if we have excellent, talented people. And diversity is actually, I think, something that's very important to UK research and innovation. We really want the greatest talents from every possible background and environment. So it's about skills, it's about people, it's about education, it's about educating and training them to be good researchers, giving them the scale and the length of support they need to be able to make major contributions, be it in research or in innovation. And it's about making sure that where it's possible to apply that research, it is applied. So these are, to finish, this is my last substantive slide, some of the early priorities for UK research and innovation. And just to avoid doubt, they're in alphabetical order. So if you wonder why your pet subject is 5th on the list, it's because 5th in alphabetical order. No other justification at all. So starting with the 4 INS, I've talked about the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. We're doing an infrastructure roadmap at the moment. So Mark Thompson, the new chief executive chair of STFC, is working with colleagues and with widespread consultation with stakeholders here and around the world on determining an infrastructure map for the UK going out to 2030. But that will involve international working because we don't have all the infrastructure in the UK. It will take a very broad view of infrastructure, including cyber infrastructure, but also knowledge infrastructure as well. It's about innovation and commercialization, the third of the INS, international collaboration. It's about thinking about how we support excellence in place. Andrew Whitty did a piece of work for BizAs was a few years ago in which he identified strong clusters of excellence distributed around the country. We need to make sure we can support excellence wherever it is found. It's about a strategic priorities fund which will enable us to fund the type of research that doesn't easily fit into the conventional grant application process. It's about supporting people. It's about that public engagement, that societal impact. And finally, we have a commitment from the government to move our R&D commitment, the total UK R&D commitment, from about 1.68% of GDP, where it is at the moment, to 2.4% by 2027, I think. And that is an important piece of work because we know that research and development is absolutely critical to the future of a country which is dependent on a knowledge economy at a time of extraordinary global change, when there are new challenges, new opportunities, new technologies, and an industrial revolution. So it's always a pleasure to speak at Lloyd's Register Foundation. I think we have many common interests with you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sir Mark. I think it's fascinating for all of us to be able to draw that line of sight from topics that our global leaders talk about when they get together at forums such as Davos, to then come to the UK, research and innovation topics there, and then draw that line of sight right to the work that the Foundation is doing as well, and that many of you in the room are involved in. So at that point, I'd like to invite any questions for Sir Mark. Question just here. Some mic's just coming.
Hi, it's Gail from the Royal Institution. Thanks, Mark, for a very stimulating talk. I was really pleased, as you might understand, that you mentioned trust and the science meets values and public engagement and so forth. And I just wondered, and you very rightly reminded us all that it's not just about scientists, the public understanding of science, but also scientists' understanding of the public. So I was just wondering, specifically, if you have any well-formed ideas of how scientists really, if you like, upskill their understanding of the public and values. And that's sort of set in the context of some work that was done by the Royal Society of Chemistry a couple of years ago, where they found that around 84% of the public could see the value of chemistry to society, but only 12% of the scientists thought that the public would have said that. So it kind of feels to me that there is a kind of gulf between the public's attitudes towards science and the scientists' attitude towards the public.
I mean, in a sense, well-formed ideas are few and far between, but I've got some ill-formed ideas at this stage about it. My ill-formed ideas are, well, they're not so ill-formed actually, that one of the things that we've got to do when we are training researchers is pay a lot more attention to continuous professional development than I think we have done. And part of that is equipping researchers for work in all walks of life and communicating with people from all walks of life. And I think that we are, as a community, very good at talking to ourselves, but I think we're less good at talking to broader publics. And of course, there is no single public. As you know, there are lots of different publics, people with different interests and different backgrounds. But I mean, ultimately, the only way to get mutual understanding is to have mutual conversation. And I think that's critical. But I would just frame all of this. I talked a bit about diversity, equality, diversity, inclusion. But I think one of the things that we're going to do a lot of work on is the whole culture in which research is conducted. And I would refer people who are interested to the very interesting piece of work that Dame Ottoline Leiser did when she was with the Nuffield Bioethics Foundation on the culture of research. And I think if we are going to pursue ensuring that people from all backgrounds who are talented can do well in research and innovation, it's about looking at the whole culture of research. So it's not simply a sort of a gender or an ethnicity issue. It's much more making the culture of research one that people from all sorts of backgrounds want to come into. And equally, that's, I think, about making sure that people do engage with the public effectively. I used in my last job to get asked quite frequently, wouldn't it be better if there were more researchers, scientists in Parliament, and wouldn't it be better if politicians understood a bit more science? And my rejoinder was always, well, it would be quite good if scientists understood a bit more about politics. And equally, you can't blame the people who've stood for election. You can only talk to the people that haven't stood. And it's not part of the culture of researchers in general to become politicians. So it's a long answer. You can work out how ill-formed it was.
Thank you. Any other questions? There's one on there and then one at the front afterwards.
Hi, Neil McCullum here from Lloyd's Register Group. From a UK research perspective, what would you say are the major barriers still preventing effective adoption and application of research findings into industrial applications?
Well, I mean, there are many, many barriers. So you can take them, as it were, along the chain. I mean, I think one barrier is that I think that sometimes the technology, the ideas simply aren't sufficiently developed to make them useful. And so I think there's the danger, as it were, of thinking that things are going to get taken up much too quickly. I think there's another issue of not understanding the customer properly. And then I think on the other side, I did talk about this a bit, I think it's actually how we educate people to be better customers and perhaps provide better intermediaries between suppliers of technology and the people that will use them. And I think there's quite an interesting metaphor from the world of buildings and architecture, which is that if any of us wanted to build a house, we wouldn't be terribly sensible if we went straight to a builder and said, I want you to build me a house, and I'd like you to have a bathroom here and a kitchen there and a sort of stairs over here, and then they start laying some bricks. Oh, the plug's in the wrong place. We get an architect to help us as an intermediary. If you buy a big and expensive computer system, then you go straight to the bricklayers. And it's not surprising when these things go wrong. And so I think we need very smart equivalents of architects between customers and the suppliers of technology to help people be better customers when, frankly, it's extremely difficult for people to be customers of technology. So I think that's quite an important issue as well. It's only a partial answer to what's quite a complicated question.
And then the gentleman in the front row after that.
Hello there, yeah, it's Mark Everard here from University West of England. Thanks, Sir Mark, that was really enlightening. I've got questions about infrastructure and innovation. Does the infrastructure roadmap, does it cover natural infrastructure? The Natural Capital Committee's third report concluded that investment in appropriately placed natural infrastructure would pay back at least as well as traditional built infrastructure. And likewise, innovation, does that embrace nature-based solutions, and particularly their hybridization with more technological solutions?
Okay, well, I think it's your last part of the answer that is probably relevant, but because, I mean, this really is the infrastructure to support research and development itself. There is obviously a much broader agenda around natural capital and the natural environment, and that is a different piece of work. That's not what the infrastructure roadmap is about. I mean, I think the short answer is that's not going to be a major component of that work, although it is very important in general terms. And in my previous job, you know, that's something that's of enormous importance in terms of science advice to government. It is important for society. But in terms of the actual infrastructure, I mean, I'll give you one example. Well, it's not natural infrastructure at all, actually. It's a salt mine. So, I mean, there are, but I mean, that's a piece of human engineering. It certainly isn't natural infrastructure. It's an interesting question. I'll think about it more.
Thank you. In relation to this, world's becoming more smaller and smaller in terms of so many people are competing for the same type of technology innovation. Where do you or your organization stand globally in terms of the league table, in terms of innovation and research and development?
I mean, league tables are only league tables. League tables don't look at an organizational level. If you look at a national level, the UK is actually doing very well in global innovation league tables. You know, you pick the one that gives you the best answer, but actually the UK has gone up the innovation league tables dramatically in recent years. In terms of research and development, well, if you look by almost every metric, we outperform in terms of our research. You can, and it doesn't matter how you measure it. If you measure it by corrected citation indices, we're arguably first in the world, actually, field-weighted citation indices. If you count Nobel Prizes, we do very well. We're building on a very, very strong base.
I think we've just got time for one last question, if there is one. Just a gentleman there, red tie. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Can I just flip that last question on its head by asking, when you started off looking at global challenges, but then you've, obviously with your work for the UK government, looked at UK-based solutions. You gave one example of CERN. If you want to do particle physics, you've got to go international. But where do you see other collaborations or where should other nations be coming together in this whole agenda of innovation?
I mean, I think the short answer is one's got to be careful about being too top-down. I think you've actually, at some level, got to. Our job is to be catalytic. It's to enable researchers and innovators to develop their ideas to achieve their potential. And one way of looking at it is looking at, again, one's got to be suspicious of any research metric, but if you look at citations of papers that have authors from more than one country, in other words, that come from international collaborations, on average are cited significantly more than papers that come from authors from a single country alone. Now, one's of course always got to be careful of causation and correlation. This is not causation, it's correlation. So what it's telling you is that the best researchers will work with the best researchers wherever they are in the world. It's not telling you that if you've got a mediocre group of researchers and they bung someone in from another country, it will immediately up the citation rate. That won't happen. But it does tell you that actually the research community does want to work around the world, and our job is to make it easy for that to happen. If you want to take the top-down view, then clearly when it comes to everything from human genomics, where studying genetic variation in different populations tells you far more than studying it in a single population. If you want to study astronomical research, where you're forced to do it in areas of optical or radio silence, then you have to do that in certain parts of the world, either high in the Atacama Desert or in the Karoo if you're building the square kilometre array. To questions around climate change, where again, at one level, you can only understand the climate if you actually work at a global level, otherwise you're just looking at local weather and seasons. And at another level, the scale and difficulty of the problems means that you really do have to work at an international level. But I mean, I always work on the basis that form should follow function, and it's not a question of doing things for the sake of it. It's a question of international collaboration when it is the best thing to do, which is often the case. But there are still circumstances when a single investigator working in a single laboratory or library is going to make major contributions. There's no single right answer.
Thank you very much, Sir Mark, for a fascinating discussion.